Welcome to Connected Conversations for Creatives. I'm your host, Jennifer Carr, and I am thrilled to be able to introduce to you today Terry Bartley. He is an author, a podcaster, a high school English teacher, and he was so gracious to jump on this crazy train with me just for an hour. And I'm excited to let him share his story. And then we're just going to dive into a topic that I think creatives really struggle with at some point on their journey, beginning, middle, or end. It doesn't matter. So, Terry, thank you for being here and just being willing to share your insight with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I mean, I feel like a lot of life and being creative is sort of like doing it and failing and then doing more of it and failing again and then doing more of it. So most of the lessons that you learn come from those multiple failures. So I'm happy to share that so that people can take them with them on their first failure.
Yes, and I love that because being able to relate to somebody else's good and bad sometimes can get you over that last struggle,
Yeah, yeah.
that hump that you just got to get over. So tell us what you want us to know about you. I know you said you're an author. Tell us about when you became an author, what you're currently writing, whatever you want us to know about you.
Yeah, so I've been writing like um professionally, realistically, I've been writing for a number of years because I went to school originally to become a broadcast journalist, which transitioned into a lot of like podcasts and interviews for the radio stations. And but then also I like wrote for a newspaper and I wrote for Screen Rant for a little while. So like I've done a lot of like writing from a journalist perspective for quite some time, but it's not really where my heart is. And that's sort of what I've been writing for the past, I don't know, like 5-ish years. It was pre 2020. So there's like this gap where it's like, was it 2 years ago or was it 12 years ago? And I'm not sure. But I think it was 5 years ago. I started writing pretty seriously. And I've been writing fantasy because that's what I love fantasy. If there's magic involved, then I'm there. And I basically turned characters from my Dungeons and Dragons campaign I've played with my friends for years into a novel. And like I reimagined things and made it my own. And I sort of like crafted a story around the idea of a couple of characters. And that was where I started. And then I started to edit that novel, and that was 2020 when I was like in the editing phase. And it was just like I can't focus on this, like probably because the world was burning down around me. So then I was like, I just need to figure out something else to do. So I started writing short stories set in the same world as the novel. And then I set a goal in 2021. No, it was last year's 2022 to write 100 short stories in a year set in that fantasy world. I didn't get there, but the goal was important because it motivated me to like do it. And I ended up with a little over 50 stories, which is like only halfway, but like that's a lot of stories to write in a year. So like I was still pretty happy with what I ended up with. So I decided to turn those stories into a collection. So that is the book that is coming out in August, which is Tyranny of the Fae. It is a collection of short stories set in the universe of my novel, which that will be coming out the following year. And this is kind of like a preview into the world. And also, a lot of these characters have ties one way or the other to characters in the novel. So it's kind of like background information. But also, there's a lot of really cool characters focused in this book. There's three main characters, all of which are strong queer women that were kind of like exploring the stories of. And it was just a fun journey to kind of really delve into these sort of what would be side characters usually in a story.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Like, how do you keep up with all of the world building? I mean, I guess if it's in your imagination, it's in your imagination, but like, do you have a method that you keep up with all of that?
I mean, no, but yes. I'm not I'm not a super organized person. Or like I say that, but probably people would be like, no, you are. But I write, I don't like world building. So I don't like the idea of like sitting down and writing like this is the money system, this is the political system. This is like I don't like that part of it. I like approaching things through character. So what I noticed when I did the short stories was that I was sort of given the opportunity to world build through character because as I focused on a different character, I got to like, well, where do they live? What is their city like? What is the culture like there? How would they react to this thing or that thing? And it was a really, I think that it fit me as a writer much better because I was able to world build this fantasy universe in a really deep way through the perspective of characters scattered throughout the planet. And that has been kind of fun for me. And then so I just have like multiple writing Google documents that are like, oh, that person cast a spell. So let me write that down so I know whenever people say these words, that's cast this spell. So that I know if I need to use the spell later, they got to use these words again. And so I've got a lot of things like that, to like keep track of the world building things. And I can't tell you the number of times I've had to like go into the novel or go into one of my previous short stories to be like, what? I know I said something about this. What did I say? Do I need to be consistent, or can I make up a new thing now? And like that's been a whole process. And I'd like to be better at that, but I'm super not. Like I'm always going back in my old stuff to find what I need to remember.
I totally can relate to that. My first book came out in October of last year, and then my second one, I just sent it to the beta readers. And so, but while I was in the process of writing the second one, I had to go back to book one. I was like, let me look at this timeline real quick to make sure that I didn't just like completely jump into the future or miss something. And so I have all these tabs all throughout my copy of the book. And I'm just like, okay, here this has happened and here this happened. And I like highlighted everything so that I could stay on track, because I'm the same way. Like if it's not in my Word document or on my Google Doc, then I'm up a creek. I have to go back and reread the whole book. And so I
Yeah,
totally
like
can
I'll have
relate to
vague
that.
memories of talking about
Yes.
things. So it's like I know I talked about, like I'm writing a series of short stories now focused on a character who's really involved in the criminal underworld in one of the large cities, which is like a minor aspect of the character in the novel. So I have to like jump into the novel to like figure out what exactly I said about that so that I can make sure that I connect it. And I just sort of like reread the same three chapters like every time I write a story for this character. So it's like just to make sure I've got everything straight.
The struggle is real. Like, I mean, I'm not even kidding. There was one point where I had to go back and I was like, wait, that was not the color hair that person had. Like, you just have to, sometimes you just have to
Yeah,
go
yeah.
back to go forward. And which that actually kind of goes along with what we're going to talk about today. Sometimes you do have to go back to go forward. Like, you have to start over, so that you can make progress. So your podcast is called Most Writers Are Fans, and it's a really great show. It's a very cool concept where like you sit down and talk to all these artists about their art and their thoughts on different aspects of their art. And in your first podcast episode, you give a lot of background about how you landed where you are. And I love your story, because I feel it. Like we're soulmates on a different level. I'm telling you, because you took a lot of rabbit trails to kind of get to where you
Mm-hmm.
are. And I think as creatives, and maybe it's just because our brains move so fast, or we constantly want to do the next thing and we're not sure how to get there. I don't know what it is, but a lot of creatives struggle with this, because I've always been a dreamer, and that kind of plays into my creative process. I think, like when it comes to writing, I'm a pantser, a discovery writer, whatever you want to call it, and I'm also a planner of like big things, and sometimes they don't work
Yeah,
well
yeah.
together. And so, and I've been told on more than one occasion that I would be what was considered extra, and that's just, it's not necessarily high maintenance, but like I tend to go overboard with my planning and my execution of plans and that kind of thing. And I get obsessed with the tiny details, and there's nothing wrong with being extra, as long as you don't really lose the focus of the big picture, which is, it's easy to do. And so in
Yeah.
order to maintain my extraness and also and focus on those details but also stay on task, I have to set goals, right? And that's what we're here to talk about. So what were your goals when you set out to become a writer, and how have they changed over the years? You kind of talked about how you've had different jobs in writing, but kind of tell us about the goals that got you to where you are.
Yeah, so truthfully, I was very bad at goal setting for a very long time. Because I always would have like pie in the sky, like vague goals. Like I don't know how many times in my life it'd be like, I'm gonna move to New York City in 2 years. And I would do nothing to get me there. But I would
Yeah.
like, no, but I will. In 2 years I'll get there. And then like time would roll around. It's like, oh wait, I don't have any money saved. I don't have any plans. I don't have a job lined up. What was my what was the goal? What was the plan here? What
Mm-hmm.
was I gonna be doing? So
Mm-hmm.
I did a lot of that for much of my life. Or like I would like start a project and it's like, well, this project is going to be successful, and then I wouldn't know how, but it's like, oh, but it is. It's just going to happen, and then I'll be rich and I'll be fine. I can do whatever I want. So there's a lot of that for a very long time, and then it really wasn't until I got my ADHD diagnosis that I was like, this makes a lot of sense. I have a really distinct memory of, so I was in this young professional organization called the JCs, where it's about like being leaders and like doing communities in your hometown to like help the community, but also by running those projects, you're like becoming a leader also. So I was in a fellowship program because that was the other thing I would do. Anytime an opportunity sprung up, it was like, well, I'm going to do that because that sounds like a thing that will help me get to wherever I'm going, wherever that is,
Yeah.
whatever
Yep.
the big idea of that is. So whenever I was in the fellowship program, we had a trainer come in that had us write down like what we felt our milestone moments were. So, and then they paired us up at the end and we chatted with another person about our milestones. So the other person I talked to was like, I feel like this moment and this moment was my milestone. And I was like, well, I feel like this moment and 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 this moment were my milestone moments because like everything has, I've never done a thing that didn't fully change my life path. Like everything was like jumping drastically from one thing to the other. And I think that once I got the diagnosis, it was like, well, this explains so much about my life. So then I just sort of decided because I was already on the path of being a teacher. I was earning a degree because I had to figure out a job and I was working another job that was like a freelance part-time thing. So I was like, well, I want to be a substitute teacher to have money for this freelance part-time thing. So if I pursue an education degree, then I can be a substitute teacher on the side to then sort of supplement the income. So I was already earning an education degree really by happenstance, really just because I was doing it to afford the other job I was working. And so I was like, well, so I just finished that degree and I was like, all right, well, I'm a teacher now. That's a consistent job. And this is the thing, like people talk about teachers not getting paid a lot, which is true. We don't get paid what we're worth. But whenever you typically get paid nothing, or you're getting paid like freelance part-time jobs for your entire life, having a consistent payday that happens twice a month is like life-changing. It's like, wow, I didn't realize that this is what having a job was like. This is, or was supposed to
It's
be like, you know? So while I was a teacher, I was like, okay, so I don't want to be a teacher forever because again, this was happenstance. This just sort of just happened. But I want to be a writer. That's the thing I want to do. I went to school to get my English degree originally after I quit college because that's part of being an ADHD person is not finishing the first thing you start.
Mhm.
So whenever I went to get an English degree, it was because I wanted to be a writer. I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to tell stories. I want to, do that. So I earned an English degree and then never did anything with it until I went back to school to be a teacher. So I was like, well, I want to be a writer. That's a goal I have set. That's a thing I want to do. So I just have to figure out what can I do regularly that will allow me to get there. So then I just started writing consistently. So once a week for an hour, I go to Starbucks and I would just write towards something. And once I started doing that, over time it was like, oh, this is turning into something. Like this is actually happening. There's progress happening. So then I set a goal that was like, well, I want to finish this novel by this day. And it was like towards the end of the year, it was like a reasonable goal. Like if I wrote as much as I've been writing each week, then I could get there by this day. And as I got near the goal, I was like maybe a little bit behind where I should be, but I could see the end of the tunnel. So then I got more excited and I would like start writing more frequently. Like if I had like off time at my job, I would like type and write stories, or I would like, start plotting different outlines and stuff every moment I had because I got really excited about meeting the goal. So I think that that's the first goal I set was to finish the novel, and just sort of it highlighted for me that having a goal is a motivation all on its own, and it's something that I really hadn't realized before that.
Yes, in psychology, there are actually multiple theories about how goal setting is a form of motivation. Like it that is what goal setting is. It is motivation, but they're also considered performance enhancers. So not only do they drive you towards achievement, but you arrive at that achievement as your best self.
And honestly, it's the most ADHD thing in the world to have landed on the perfect solution by accident.
Isn't that crazy? Like how after your diagnosis and you kind of with ADHD. Now, listen, I have never been formally diagnosed with ADHD, but with all of my decades of experience in the world of psychology, I know that it is there
Yeah, yeah.
inside my head. Like it is there. And that's true for a lot of creatives. So after your diagnosis and things started to kind of click and you were like, oh, okay, so you have to kind of take some special steps in order for goals to make sense. And I know that's true for me. So what changed when it came to setting goals? Like what did you have to change in order to achieve the goals that you set and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think the main thing that changed was that I always set goals around the same thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
what had happened previously was I would just whatever the shiny thing was, I would like chase after it.
Mhm.
So like once I decided that writing was going to be the thing that I pursued, if I set a goal, it was going to be related to that somehow. Like whenever I started my podcast, I didn't start the podcast because I wanted to start a podcast. I started the podcast because I wanted to promote my writing
Mhm.
somehow,
Mhm.
and have a thing to put out in the world that wasn't specifically related to writing, but did allow me to talk about it. And then hopefully people could find me there and then sort of like migrate over into my writing. Whether or not that has happened is like up for debate, but like it is a thing that I do that is directly related to writing. So I think that that is the big thing that has shifted. Like everything, whenever I set a goal now, everything is in some way related to being a writer, being an author. And I think that that's something that I never had done before, because I always would jump to like, oh, there's an open mic night. I could just go play mandolin pop covers at this open mic night. And that'll be like a fun thing that I can pursue for a while. And then I can go like, you know, work on this nonprofit for 2 years and I can change the world and I'll save. And this is my goal. This is my calling in life. This is what I was meant to do. This is a thing that I never knew I had to do this. This is the thing that I was brought to this world to do. And now it's kind of like the world doesn't just tell you that. Like you have to at some point decide for yourself, like, what is the thing that you want to do with your life? And I think that that's sort of the big shift in my head.
Yes, and that is so true for just setting goals in general. Like you have to sit down and take the time to reflect on what it is you want to achieve. Like those little squirrels in my head, sometimes they're like, "This sounds great. This is what we're gonna do." But like with the podcast, not only are you able um, to put your work out there, but you're also helping other people at the same time kind of work through the things that you needed to work through as well, which is kind of like what I wanted to do here, was just to be able to say, hey, we've all got something in common. We can all learn from each other and just kind of share that. But when I sat down to write a book, like I had to decide, okay, what is my goal here? My goal was to write a novel. All right. What is the novel genre? I had to decide what the genre was going to be. How many words is it going to be? And I'm like, you have to break it down. And that's true for whether you've decided to write a novel, short stories, a memoir, or whatever. And then, I had to decide, am I putting myself on a deadline? Because, this was a first experience. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Like, was I going to publish it traditionally or whatever? And so, you break it down into, not only do you decide what your goal is, like what you want to achieve, but then you have to break it down into those achievable steps. And there's a visual that I always think about when I talk to people about setting their goals. You don't come to a staircase and look at the top landing and say, I'm going to get there in one step, because you can't. You literally cannot go from ground zero to the top landing. You have to take the steps. And the benefit of taking one step at a time is, if a step is broken, or that goal is not going to work for you, you can skip it, or you can sidestep whatever you need to do to get around that step. That step is not for you. Okay, let's go to the next step. We'll get there. You can take a break when you get tired, because there's a step for you to rest on. So those steps matter, right? And so you can't just say, I'm going to write a book. No, you need to kind of break down what kind of book are you going to write? How many words is that book going to be? How many, break it down that way. And if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't broken it down, I probably either would have stopped soon after I got started, or I might not have started at all, because I would have been overwhelmed by the idea of, I'm going to write a book.
Yeah, and I think that that's very much what happened with the novel, because when I started editing it, like that's not as fun creatively to do, right? Like if I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what to do, and I didn't know what I was doing, like I didn't hire an editor, I was just
Mm-hmm.
like doing it on my own. And I had beta readers, people just like friends that had read the book, and like I got great feedback. But then it's like I have to sort of like then rework the entire novel, which isn't actually the most productive thing to do, because like you really just need to figure out what little changes can you make that can like help improve those things. And that's the thing that I've learned over time. So I think as I got towards the idea that I was like, well, I should start publishing these short stories, I started talking to one of my very good friends. Like I've known him since college and we've been friends forever. And he's one of those people that has always been in my life, and he always sort of saw potential in like who I could be, which I think was good to have that person in my life. But as I started talking about writing these stories, he was like he was the one that sort of encouraged me to publish them. And then he worked with me to kind of like set dates of like, well, you need a cover, you need an editor, and then like we set dates for like when to do those things. So I have a call with him. Like he's not technically an agent, right? But I talk to him every other week, and he reminds me of the deadlines that we set. And I think that also like that level of accountability and that added layer of accountability has really helped me to kind of like actually achieve these goals and actually work towards them.
Absolutely. I think that a literary success coach. I've actually, one of my good friends, he's been on the show. His name is DK Walker. He's a literary success consultant. And that's what he does. Like he literally will help people walk one step to the next step. And he's been such an encouragement because we have this accountability. So yes, find that person or those people, whatever it is that you work best with, and share that load with them, because especially for those of us who have special brains, they can get overwhelmed very easily. And sometimes things get skipped or ignored or missed, not on purpose, but it happens.
Yeah.
I've got like 3 different planners here on my desk in front of me. And I'm like, it might be excessive, but that's how I have to function. And so,
Mm-hmm.
but yes, finding that person, your person that you can be like, hold me accountable, and make it a fair trade, do something for them as well. Like be their accountability or whatever they need to do. But yes, form that network of support. That's huge.
Well, and I think just sort of having, I mean, that's the thing I've learned about having the podcast is I've been making contacts with like other people that are in the same industry as me, because that was the thing I never even thought was like a thing I should do. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I don't know why, like I'm just doing this thing and I'm on my own. Like I'm doing all this on my own. And like I don't even necessarily ask for help specifically from a lot of these people, but just knowing they're out there and are
Mm-hmm.
doing similar things and they're posting on their socials about like the challenges they're experiencing, and I have some connection because I had a conversation with them. I think that helps a lot to just be like, there's other people out here doing the same thing that I'm doing, and here's things that they struggle with that are also things that I struggle with. And like that's what I sort of think. And then the other thing is we can share each other's stuff to like also sort of lift each other up. And I think that's been really exciting and something that I didn't expect to come out of the podcast. Because again, I started the podcast to help push my own stuff. So this idea that I was like building a network and like sort of like making new friends through it was sort of like this unexpected benefit that has kind of been the reason I've kept doing it. Not even necessarily because I think, like I said, I don't think it's actually helped people see my writing that much. I think it's just a podcast that exists in the world that some people listen to, some people don't. But it's been a great tool for me to like go out and meet other people that I want to talk to, you know.
Yeah, and that's exactly what my goal was too, was to say, we isolate ourselves a lot of times as creatives, and I've said this a couple times, that we tend to find ourselves on a very lonely journey as a creative, whether we isolate on purpose or I don't really know. I know that for me personally, because I don't want to generalize and say this is everybody, but for me personally, a lot of times I'm scared to share because my work comes from me, right? And so I'm scared of the judgment that exists out there. I'm scared of maybe the criticism that awaits or whatever the case may be. But oh my gosh, how much freedom is there in finding people that can say, I know exactly what you're saying. I can feel what you're feeling right now. And for me, like I am by nature an introvert. I can carry conversations, we can talk, we can hang out. But after we're done here, I'm going to go sit on the couch and I'm going to need an hour to reprogram, right? Like I need to decompress. And so, and that may be true for other people as well, that, your personality can kind of isolate you as well, if you don't go out seeking it. But oh my gosh, let me encourage you, if you're listening, like, and Terry, he said it himself, like finding these people, like it just takes a load, like the burden is kind of lifted almost just from having
Yeah.
someone that, even if you don't talk to them every day, like you find that encouragement there from that network that you're creating.
Yeah, and I think it's so isolating. Again, I don't know if this is universal, but first of all, I think it feels isolating because I grew up in a small town. I live in West Virginia, so I grew up in a very small town, and I always felt different. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like I always
Mm-hmm.
felt like I didn't fit in different ways, and
Mm-hmm.
like multiple different ways. Like looking back
Mm-hmm.
now, but I think the main thing that was different was I wanted things out of life that like other people didn't even consider as like things they want out of life. Like I want to be well known. I want people to like care about
Mm-hmm.
the things I create. I want to like have a following. And those
Mm-hmm.
are things that I think I think it's more common now with like the social media world that we live in. Whenever I was growing up, like it was kind of like, no, you want to get a job and you want to work there for 20 years or whatever, and you want to like have a family and settle down. And like those were not the things that I wanted. And I always felt like I was weird because I wanted them, you know? So I think that that's part of why I feel so isolating, because it's like, well, I can't talk to the people around me about this because they just don't understand
Mm-hmm.
it. They just can't
Mm-hmm.
understand it. And I think that that's the thing that is so freeing about having other people that pursue the same things that you pursue, is like, I'm not weird. There are people like me that are on this path. And I can talk to these people about these things that I can't talk to the people actually in my life about.
Yes, I can totally relate to that. I grew up in a small town as the local preacher's kid. Like, you want to talk about some pressure to follow a certain path, and not all of us want to follow that certain path. We sometimes we have those rebellious streaks for a reason, but
Yeah.
I'm not, that this is not the podcast for that conversation. But I think that that is exactly what it is as well. For a lot of us, it's people don't understand the creative side of things. We're supposed to fit this certain mold. We're supposed to work within these parameters. And I'm sorry, but my imagination says no. Like,
Yeah.
my imagination breaks from that mold, and I can't do that. And that's okay, because I'm not the only one. And I do think that until the social media aspect of things really picked up, it was a lot harder. Now, is the pressure there? There is a little more pressure, I think, in a different kind of way with the social media and that kind of thing. But we can find people a lot easier than we used to be able to, that we can connect with. So, pros and cons, that's true for everything, I guess. But yes, I am so thankful that TikTok exists, because that is where I have found so many of my connections. And it was one that I swore off. I was like, I can't do that. I'm not cool enough to be on. Some of my favorite people came from TikTok.
Well, and I think that something that sort of is like important advice to just sort of put down to the world is that when you're a creative person, when you want to create things and you want people to read those things or see those things or watch those things, whatever is the thing that you do, that's not vain. It's not
Mm,
vain to want
yes.
that. And I think that we're told by society. I mean, like I had a discussion in my class this past Friday where we talked about like, are people inherently good or bad? And the conversation shifted to social media because, it's
Mm,
kids. And they talked about like the people that give like people money on the street as like a TikTok video. They're like, but isn't that so vain because they want attention? And it's like, well, no, that's their job. Like their job is
mhm.
to get people to watch them. So like, it's not vain to want to continue to do your job. And I think that that's something that sort of like society tells us like, oh, you shouldn't want attention, because if you want attention, then you're just like being selfish, or you're being like attention grabby. And like, I don't think that that's true. And I think that we need to sort of like squash that, because I think that it makes sense from a logical like morality perspective to like, oh, you shouldn't want people to like look at you or care about you, but like you should if you're creative, because like how else is your work going to get out there?
Exactly. And your goal when you're an artist of any form is, like, you don't create art for yourself. You create art because you want to share your art. Usually, I mean, I guess there are some people who refuse to share their art, but the whole point to me for art is for it to be shared. And that means that you sometimes have to stand up in front of people and be like, look what I did. I mean, we did that as
Yeah.
kids though, right? Like, we were always so excited. We'd come home from school and be like, Mommy, look what I drew. Like, when did that stop? When did we start getting
Yeah, when did it
our
become not
little,
okay?
yes, like, when did we start getting our little hearts broken and squished, and like, we don't brag about that. I'm like, listen, you can show off your art and maintain humility. If that's what you're worried about, like, you can maintain your humility while also being proud of your work. I know that sounds so contradictory, but it's not. Like, there's and I don't mean humble brag, because we know what humble brags are. It's like, that's
It's
that's not what I
brags.
mean. Yeah, it's bragging. Just take the humble off. Like, there's no humility there. But you can be proud of the work because you're doing it. Yeah, you're doing it for you because it's you want to make money from it. But at the same time, I mean, your goal is to share your heart with somebody and hope that they connect with it on the same level you did. I mean, that's why I write, because I want people to connect with the story that I'm telling, not because I want them to connect with me. They do that vicariously, right, through the story, but I want them to connect with the story because I think my story has meaning.
And I will say, because it's hard now, like you sort of have to be the face of your work in
Mhm.
today's world, right? Like there's sort of no way around it. And so I do feel bad for the people who are more introverted. Like like I said, I went to college for broadcast originally. So like I was always somebody that wanted to be like in front of a camera. So like this whole TikTok thing, this podcast thing, this isn't weird for me. Like this is like a thing that I sort of like always have lived in that world.
Mhm.
But I really feel for the people who are like, I want to be a writer that just like puts books out into the world and people read them and they find them and they love them. Because like that used to be a thing that existed, like that
Mhm.
used to be a thing that existed. But now publishers do not put a lot of money behind marketing anymore. So even
Mhm.
if you're a traditionally published author, you're going to be doing a lot of your own marketing. So like you have to be doing the kind of stuff that we're doing, whether you're self-published or traditionally published. And so I do feel for those people because like it's just true that is kind of like those creatives don't exist anymore. There's not a lane for them. And that is sad and like frustrating because it's like only certain people now are able to be successful. There's people that are able to like I have a social media manager that I hired that does a little bit of posting for me. And she mentioned that my TikTok, where I post like 3 videos a week, and I have been consistently for like a year or so, was unusual for authors. That most authors, like, they don't even want to be in videos usually. So, like, I feel really bad for those people because, like, it's going to be a much steeper climb for them in the environment that we live in now.
Yes, and it is really unfair in a lot of ways, the way that traditional publishing has worked in the past and now. I think that's why it's so important to find the people that can provide the resources, right? You have a social media manager, so you have somebody on your team that can do that. I have a friend who we're actually on the start of that process, kind of I'm her guinea pig, if you will, to kind of talk about how to help authors do better when it comes to whether they're traditionally published or self-published, because you do have to put in a whole lot of work. It's not just you write a book and there it is. It doesn't just hit the shelf and
Yeah.
all of a sudden you're successful. Like there's a lot of work that goes into it. And so but so connect with those people and support other people in those businesses, but also make sure you're supporting the right people, because there are also some people out there who would love to take your money and would love to leave you empty handed. So you do have to be kind of wise when it comes to making those choices. But yeah, like finding the people who can help you do it, because some of us are only creative in so many ways, and you have to be creative when it comes to your social media stuff. And
Yeah.
oh, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Or have opinions, like have things to talk about.
Oh my gosh. Or and not to be afraid to share your opinions, because oh my goodness, I don't I don't want people coming at me with pitchforks if I say the wrong thing, but at the same time, like I have opinions and I want to share them. But that also goes back to finding your people, right? And finding the person or the network, that your community, if you will, that's there for you, because attract the people that you want to attract and ignore the voices that aren't going to lift you up and encourage you. That's been my mantra for the last couple of years. And it has been definitely like just tune out to the voices that are not going to take you forward. If they're trying to bring you back or to pull you down, ignore them. That's a word of advice that has nothing to do with anything we've really been talking about, but there it is.
Well, it is a frustrating voice in the back of your head, right? Because like
Mm.
I don't want, I'm not a big fan of like the movie Waterworld, right? Like that's a movie that I think about as like a movie that I hate, but there are people that love it. So like I
Mhm.
don't want to talk about that on TikTok, and then people who would have otherwise enjoyed my book is now fully their opinion of me is fully tainted because I didn't like the movie Waterworld. Like that's a thing that it's like you have to think about, and it's so dumb that we have to think about things like that.
And exhausting. Oh my goodness. Like imagine the number of things, because people do get upset about those little things. Like, I'm sorry, I have preferences. It is what it is. But they will get up in arms about it. And I guess at that point though, you could easily approach that subject and make it fun and still hold to your opinion and be like, who else hates this movie? And then
Yeah.
you also attract the people who are like, me, me. That's not my type. That's not my type at all. Mm-mm. Go ahead.
I didn't have anything to say. I was going to wait to see if you just had a question to, to lead the conversation forward.
I know. I was like, I'm so like, we are so, I love this though, because we started talking about goals and then it just kind of flowed into other things. Let's go back to goals real quick. So when it comes to goal setting and having goals and that kind of thing, One of the more important things that I tell, because I do counsel, I still do counseling, and a lot of times it's more of a coaching than a counseling because people are not really up for counseling these days. And I'm fine with that because as a counselor, I tend to, I listen a lot and then I share my advice, and they're like, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. With a coach and as a coaching thing, we talk a lot about shifting mindset, and people see this to be a lot easier for some reason, which is funny because to me, like providing behavioral therapies of sorts, like it's the same thing. But if I call it shifting a mindset, people understand what I'm saying. So we're going to talk about shifting mindsets. There's a lot of flexibility in your mindset that is required when it comes to setting goals and achieving goals. If your mindset is so fixed, and this kind of goes to like maybe those people who are so intent on not letting other people share their opinion. I don't know. But if your mindset is fixed, your likelihood of failure when it comes to setting goals is a lot higher. So you have to have a flexible mindset when it comes to setting goals, which for some of us, flexibility in the mindset is a good thing, but we also have to keep it in check. Have you found that to be true for you? Like you're being able to roll with the punches sometimes, like with your goals, is kind of important.
Yeah, I think that that's part of what I have enjoyed about like this process. And I feel like if I ever don't have a full-time day job, which is the goal, right? Like the goal is to be a writer and to not have to be a teacher on the side, which is
Mm-hmm.
like insane to say. But like usually teachers are full-time teachers, and that's the thing they do, then they do something else on the side. But like I don't want to have to do that forever. So whenever I do depend on this for money, I do feel like this may feel less like this may be harder. The thing that I've enjoyed is that if I miss a goal, then it's like, well, no one is holding me to this goal. I set it for me. So
Mm-hmm.
like if I'm a week or two late, like it's not a big deal. I mean, like this week, for example, my podcasts usually come out on Friday. Every Friday morning is what I try to do. But I got busy this week. I had car trouble. Like I had a lot of stuff going on this week, and I didn't get to editing on Thursday. And I was like, well, I could stay up all night and then go to school with no sleep, or I could just decide to edit it when I get back home from school. And who's going to care? I don't have a ton of listeners, and it's my podcast, so like I'm not going to be mad at me if I don't get it out. And I think that that's the thing that I've learned is that like if the goal is me and is not other people, then it's okay to miss it and it's not the end of the world. And that doesn't mean the goal wasn't important. That doesn't mean that I shouldn't still follow through with it, but it means that the deadline was sort of there as a motivating factor. And if I'm a little bit past it, that's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, sometimes you have to step back and reevaluate, right? But yeah, sometimes you have to take a step back and reevaluate the goals that you've set because maybe this is not the right time. Maybe the goal was too big. Also, life happens, right? Like you, car trouble happens, work happens, a kid gets in trouble, it happens, whatever, a kid gets sick. So yeah, making sure that you have that flexibility, but you also have to make sure that you're not taking advantage of your own flexibility because I could very
Mhm.
easily talk myself into, oh, well, I've reset it once, I can reset it again. I can
Yeah.
check my goals at the door over and over again. Well, then what happens? Failure. That's what happens.
And I think that that's the thing about remembering that the goal is important. Like the thing that I wanted to do is still a thing that I want to do. And if I keep shifting it, then it's going to send signal to me that I don't want to do it. So like I don't want to get to that place because it's happened before. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's the big thing is like, all right, well, I didn't meet this deadline. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a deadline. That just means that I maybe should shift it a week. Because then, like on Friday, whenever I got home after school, I still spent a couple hours to edit my podcast and get it released, right? Like I still did it that day. I just
Yep.
didn't do it when I wanted to do it. Like I think that that's the thing is like, all right, so I didn't achieve the thing by this deadline, but let's specifically set aside time right now, maybe not right now, but like later in the week when I have time to finish this thing that I wanted to do.
Oh yeah. I have this tendency to, if I don't hit the goal, because again, this goes back to me like planning and just being very detail oriented. I get mad at myself sometimes if I don't hit the goal that I've set for myself. And then I beat myself up over it. And I think, okay, I'm done. Like this goal, clearly I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to be successful. And so I have to kind of talk myself down at times where I say, it's okay because you've actually done better. And this goes back to, and I think I've shared this before on a different episode, was I had this word count a day that I was trying to hit, this specific word count every day. In 2 days, I missed the word count that I set. By the end of the week, I had gone above and beyond the what would be the weekly total word count. But because I missed those 2 day word counts, like I was so frustrated, and it really impacted my writing ability, like I could not focus on what my job at hand was. I couldn't, the wouldn't come because I was like, I'm not going to hit my word count again. Da, da, da. You have to be careful how you talk to yourself too when it comes to your goals, because sometimes you start believing yourself, and you can talk yourself out of something so fast.
Well, and that's the other thing. This is the thing that I sort of like, I thought about it a lot as it happened, but I've started just living my life this way, so I don't think about it as much actively anymore. But that's honestly one of the biggest things that the ADHD diagnosis gave me, was permission to forgive myself, you
Mm,
know, which I
mm,
think is probably something that everyone should do, not just people with
mhm,
ADHD.
mhm.
But like, I used to get so mad at myself because like I locked my keys in my car, and I did it like, there was one year I did it like 3 times in that year, and I would get so mad at myself because I did it again. But
Mhm.
or like, I locked myself out of my apartment because I left my keys in my house, or like I forgot this important like USB drive or something whenever I went to this event. And I would get so mad at myself, and I would just beat myself down all the time. And
Mhm.
I think that now being able to like now if I lock my keys in my car, I'm like, well, I have ADHD. And I think that it's nice to have that ability to be like, this is just a thing I do, and I can't hate this thing about myself because it is part of who I am. And truthfully, whenever anybody, regardless of your neuro state, like forget something, it's a thing that you did, and you can't hate yourself for it. Like it just happened, and like you got to just learn to kind of move past that stuff.
That's right. Well, I mean, we're human. We are only so capable of remembering so many things. So when it comes to forgetting stuff, oh my gosh, give yourself grace. You don't hit your word count for the day. Oh my gosh, give yourself grace. Like
Yeah.
there is nobody holding your feet to the fire. Now, you know, there's always an exception to everything. If you are on a deadline, if you have been given time and you have squandered that time, that's a little different. Maybe give yourself a little whooping a little bit here and there, but you have to understand also that the words that you say to yourself are words that you're going to believe, whether they're good or bad. Like the words you say to yourself will influence the rest of your everything. And because self-talk, self-speak, that's a real thing. I know sometimes we're like, no, I'm just having a bad day. Yeah, what do you come back to on your next bad day? Those words that you said to yourself before, like they're there, that once they are there, they are there. And so you have to reframe your thoughts and the way that you speak to yourself. It's so hard too, because um, sometimes whether we've heard the words from elsewhere and they repeat in our brain, or they're just, thoughts that we have about ourselves, either way, um, they can get stuck on a loop, and we tend to allow those to dictate the steps that we take. And it's dangerous because not every word that is spoken to us is going to be for the better, and it's not going to do us any good. And so we do have to be careful. And that also goes back to who you surround yourself with, to make sure that those words aren't impacting the words that you then say to yourself over and over again.
Well, and like it's instinctual in the moment, which I think it's important to acknowledge that like if you do say something negative to yourself, it's not you hating yourself, it's you
Mm-hmm.
reacting to what's happening around you.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I make a mistake on the road where I like don't hit the brake in time, and I like get really close to the car in front of me, and I'll call myself dumb or whatever, and it's like I'm not dumb,
Right.
but in this moment I feel like I am, because my reflexes weren't quick enough to do the thing that I thought I should do. And I think that's sort of like understanding that you will call yourself those things still, even if you have a pretty healthy mindset. But
Mm-hmm.
like you just got to know that it doesn't actually mean anything. It's more of like it's if you often beat yourself up, it's kind of like how you curse. Like how people will say like curse words in moments like that. It's kind of like the
Mm-hmm.
same thing. Like you're just react, that's how you react to those like surprise emergency events.
So I guess then the question is, if you train yourself to react differently, What is that playlist going to sound like in your head on a regular basis? Like if you could get away from calling yourself dumb in those situations, like what kind of impact would that might have on your mental state and your mental health? I don't know. That's just something that
Yeah.
popped
I
into
mean,
my,
I'll verbalize it. You know what I mean? Like I'll verbalize it, but then I won't actually think about it. I think that that's
right.
maybe
That's true.
important. Like I don't
That's
live in it, you know. And I used to
and
let
that's
myself live in it.
Yes, and that is the difference. Like what is your soundtrack sound like? What does that soundtrack sound like in your mind? Is it something that is it just an occasional blip on the radar, or is it going to play over and over again? Because it's what you tell yourself repeatedly is what you begin to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've called myself an idiot many times. Like the other day I dropped my full on metal water bottle on my ankle, and like I was like, oh, it was an idiot move. It was an idiot move because I just was not paying attention to what I was doing. Now I have a bruise on my ankle to show for it, but I was like, God, that was an idiot thing to do. And but I don't believe that I'm an idiot. It was a mistake. I made a mistake, and I know that. I acknowledge that. I don't live with the idiot sound in my head
Yeah.
regularly. So you do have to guard yourself from that, because if that is what you're hearing regularly, take notes about what you say to yourself in those situations. What is your first reaction in all of these situations? If it's the same reaction every time, then you might need to change your mindset just a little, maybe.
And you have to learn to like stop thinking it, you know?
Yes.
Like if because I mean, that's the thing that is so harmful. It's not necessarily that you called yourself dumb or that you call yourself
Mm-hmm.
like or that you're mad at yourself for something you did, but it's whenever
Mm-hmm.
you like start digging deeper into it and you go down those like hate spirals where you're like, you know, I'm dumb, but then also like thinking about this bad thing I did this other time. That's just evidence that this other bad thing happened, and I should have known that I was going to do this bad. Like that's when it's a problem, you know. So I think that whenever you see yourself doing it, like just kind of being like, nope, not thinking about that. Stop. That's not a road we're going down. We're not doing it. It is not healthy.
Yes, exactly. You have to kill the ants, which are negative thoughts, basically, like getting rid of those negative thoughts in your head, and just stopping them in their tracks, because um, that's that's a lot of times where people will land themselves in depression, because there is a loop in their head that constantly they're beating themselves up, they're berating themselves, and that kind of thing. And that's where you land with anxiety and depression. Actually, is a lot of internal speak is a lot of times the root of that. Yes, chemical imbalance as well, but uh, it can be greatly improved just by changing the way we think about and talk about ourselves. And so your mental health and your ability to set and achieve goals will change drastically based on what you tell yourself.
Well, and it comes down to like people around you don't know why you do things you do. So that's a big thing that I've learned, like with ADHD specifically, is like other people might say things like, I can't believe you're late, or I'm so upset that you didn't do this thing you said you would do. So like sort of being able to be like, I know that you feel that way, but I know that that's not a problem. Like it's who I am. And like, and I will often say, well, you know, I have ADHD. Like I didn't do it for this reason. And I mean, like the thing I do a lot now, which I think is sort of like funny, is I'll miss my psychiatrist appointment because like I get caught up in other stuff. And then I feel so bad, but it's like, no, they probably understand. They probably know there's a reason. I see him to get medication to treat a thing that makes me forget things. So he probably understands that there's a reason I wasn't there.
I love that. That's irony at its finest, right? Like, that's hilarious. Oh, yeah, no, you were definitely not their first no show for that reason. Guaranteed. Oh my gosh. Okay. So thinking about everything we've talked about today, what is the one takeaway that if somebody were to hear just one thing, what would you want them to take away from all of the things that we talked about?
I mean, honestly, like this isn't going to be anything that we talked about, but it's going to be like encapsulating all of
Okay.
it. I think the important thing is that it's never too late. You know,
Yes.
like if you spend your life trying to do something and then you start to feel like you're not achieving it, that doesn't mean that you can't still pursue it. And it
Mm,
doesn't mean that you can't, like, truthfully, if you've been working on something for a long time and you haven't achieved it, it's probably because you don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to do it in a way that is effective. And there's
mm,
nothing shameful about that. So like sort of like relearning and sort of like learning other strategies to do things, I think is okay. And even if it's going to change, just because you worked in the same job for a while doesn't mean that you have to always work that job. You know, like it's never too late to sort of. This is in the dedication of my book. Like it's your adventure is out there. It's never too late to find your adventure. You know.
Mm, that's good. You are exactly right on that. It's really funny. I always, when I'm writing down kind of the ideas that I want to talk to somebody about on one of these conversations, and there's just, I'm like, what kind of piece of inspirational anything can I come up with, to just to encourage people? And so what I came up with was, um, keep pushing forward and never give up on what sets your soul on fire. For your hard work and perseverance will eventually lead you to where you're meant to be. Like, I love it. It was like, I didn't know what you were going to
Yeah.
say, and and you didn't know what I was going to say, but yes, your adventure is out there. If it sets your soul on fire, go for it. Like, just move for it, because you never know what's out there until you take that first step to get out there and
Well,
just set out on that journey.
yeah. And the way your life is now is not the way your life is going to be forever. You know, like
Thank
acknowledging that I
God.
think is important.
Like, there are just some places that I look back and I'm like, I'm so glad I'm not stuck there. Like, I'm so glad that that is not where I'm wallowing right now, because right now I love everything about my life. Are there hard days? Absolutely, but I love everything about my life because it wasn't yesterday. I love
Yeah.
today, and I think that's a mindset thing. Like, you just have to wake up in the morning and be like, I'm gonna love today, and guess what? I love today.
And does it get really easy to live in the future? It sure does. But but it's better to live in the future than to live in the past, you know?
Definitely, absolutely. Because I mean, if we lived in the past, good gracious, we would never move beyond our childhood abilities and the dependence that we have. We would never become these independent thinkers and creatives, and we wouldn't be able to live adventurously at all. And so, yes, absolutely. Like, live for the future in the present.
Well, and the
Mm,
truth is too, like when you're a creative, it's hard oftentimes to get that acknowledgement that you're good at the thing you do. So you just
yes.
have to accept that you're good. Like if
Yes.
you want to do the thing, you're good enough to like want to do it. Like if you want to do it, you're good. And you just sort of
Yes.
have to like tell yourself you're good, even if no one else ever has, because like someone has to, you know? And I think you're gonna get that imposter syndrome, and you're gonna get it anyway. Like don't like accept you're gonna get it. But you sort of have to like if you want to do it, you are good enough to do it. You know,
Yes.
there are people that are worse than you, and so you're good. You know, like accept that you're good. And I think that that's hard. That's very hard to do. But I think that that's sort of what living in the future is like, I'm not a best-selling author now, but I know that I will be. You know, so like
Oh,
I'm still
yes.
accepting that I'm a best-selling author right now.
Absolutely. And I love that. And that also, like, yes, be your own biggest cheerleader, but reach out and find those people that you can
Yeah,
plug in with who will also support that same thought and mindset.
yeah, for sure.
Definitely. Terry, thank you so much for being here today and just having all of these conversations. Like, I can't say that we had one conversation because we had so many, and I love that. That's what I want. That's what I want people to be able to see is we have so much in common and we don't even know each other. Like,
Yeah,
I just
yeah.
so happened I was like, wow, he's got a lot of good stuff to say. Like, I was just doing a little scroll that I do on TikTok, and I was like, I'm going to reach out. I need to send him a message. And that's what happened. So thank you for being here. I hope that it helps somebody that was listening. I know it helped me. It was a huge encouragement just to know that we have a lot more in common than I ever would have expected. So which is awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I mean, it's part of it, right? I think that when you're a creative, chances are you have a lot in common with other creatives, and you may not realize it. I mean, I found like kindred spirits through doing
Yes.
this,
Yes,
and like that's
absolutely.
and I would have never. That's the thing about living in a small town. You would never meet those people if you didn't do
Right.
things online. You know?
Exactly. Because I'm in Alabama. You're West Virginia. Are you still in West
Yeah,
Virginia?
yeah,
See, I mean, like, there's no way we'd have ever crossed paths and known about it, except for the fact that I just was scrolling one day. That's what I do. And there you
yeah.
were. And I was like, we were just meant to have this conversation. So thank you for doing it and for being here. Um, if all of everything that he has to offer, all the books that he's writing and has written, and all of the stuff, any kind of resources he has talked about. We'll try to get them in the show notes so that everybody can hear them, or so everybody can find them for themselves. And in the meantime, let me just encourage you to continue to be creative, to be authentic, and look for an opportunity to make a new authentic connection.